The first thing that shattered the quiet wasn't a sound, because for him, silence was the only world he knew. It was the way the chandelier trembled ever so slightly above the dining table, catching the reflection of his untouched silverware like a flicker of something alive in that massive mansion in Charleston, South Carolina, where the walls felt more like tombstone slabs than home decor. Miles Harrington, a young tech millionaire who had lost his hearing in a tragic accident 3 years earlier, sat alone once again. The loneliness had become a second skin, clinging to him, no matter how many tailored suits he wore or how many expensive meals were placed before him. But that night, on a night that should have been like every other, something happened that would shake the fading pulse of his life in a way he never expected. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unexpected miracles that life gives to broken hearts, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Miles had spent the last year redefining solitude. He had risen from a startup failure to sudden wealth through a software breakthrough, only to lose everything that truly mattered when a car accident left him deaf and emotionally shattered. His fiancée left. His friendships dissolved one by one. His company expanded without him because he could no longer lead meetings, take investor calls, or handle the pressure of constant communication in a world built on noise. Even though his bank accounts were full, his world felt painfully empty. He filled that emptiness by enforcing routines, perfect routines. Dinner always at 7. Table always set for 2, even though he sat alone. Same seat, same plates, same stillness. The staff learned not to disturb him unless necessary, tiptoeing silently through the vast hallways, as if working inside a museum, not a mansion. Except for one person, someone who simply couldn't tiptoe, even if she tried. Little Maddie, the 1-year-old, daughter of the cleaning lady, Grace Porter. Grace had no choice but to bring her daughter with her during evening shifts. She always apologized with gestures and scribbled notes, but Miles never objected. He didn't like children, mostly because he didn't understand them, yet something about Maddie's bright eyes and constant motion softened a part of him he didn't know still existed. Sometimes she waved at him from across the room. Sometimes she clapped at him, not realizing he couldn't hear. And sometimes, when Grace wasn't looking, Maddie pointed at Miles' untouched food with the authority of a tiny queen commanding her kingdom. It should have annoyed him, but instead, it felt like the closest thing to interaction had had in months. That evening, the golden lights of the dining hall glowed softly as Miles sat before a plate of herb-roasted salmon. He couldn't taste the same way anymore. Food had become texture without music. He placed his fork down and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He didn't see the point of eating, but he forced himself to try. That's when Maddie, seated in her stroller nearby while Grace cleaned the adjoining room, suddenly wriggled free. She toddled toward him with her tiny legs wobbling, pointing at him with an excitement that made her curls bounce with every step. Miles didn't notice her at first. He was staring into his water glass, watching the stillness, imagining what sound might look like if he could see it. But Maddie reached him anyway, her little hand slapping against the edge of the table as she tried to climb onto the chair across from him. The movement caught his eye. He turned, and there she was, giggling silently, pointing at his mouth, then at his plate, then at her own chest as if insisting he follow her command. Grace came rushing in, her face pale with embarrassment as she scooped Maddie into her arms and mouthed, "I'm so sorry." She tried to pull Maddie away, but something strange happened. For the first time in months, Miles shook his head. He raised a finger gently, not to scold but to ask Grace to stay. The look in Grace's eyes shifted from panic to confusion to something almost grateful. She placed Maddie down but kept a firm hold on her hand. Maddie tugged, pointed again at Miles' plate, and then made a sign, an actual sign, with her tiny fingers. It wasn't perfect, but it was unmistakably an attempt at ASL. She touched her chin, then extended her hand outward. The sign for eat. Miles froze. Heat rushed up his neck. It wasn't shock at the sign itself. It was that someone so tiny had taken the time to learn even a fragment of his silent language. Grace looked stunned too. She mouthed, "She watches my ASL videos." In that moment, something cracked open inside Miles. He hadn't realized how deeply isolated he had become until a toddler broke the barrier effortlessly with one imperfect sign. Maddie insisted again, pointing at his fork, then at her own mouth. Miles chuckled silently, his first genuine laugh in months, and picked up the fork obediently. Maddie clapped, bouncing excitedly, even though he couldn't hear the sound. But he could feel the joy vibrating from her like sunlight. As he took a reluctant bite of salmon, Maddie reached into her bright pink lunchbox that Grace always carried for snacks. She pulled out a small plastic spoon and a container of mashed vegetables. She held it toward Miles as if offering an exchange. Her gesture was so earnest, so sincere, that Miles felt a warmth he thought he'd never feel again. Grace tried to pull Maddie back, but Miles gently motioned to let her be. For the first time since the accident, he didn't mind sharing the table with someone. He didn't mind the interruption. He didn't mind the unpredictability. Maddie's small presence filled the silence in a way nothing else had. Later, when Miles finished his meal, because Maddie simply wouldn't let him avoid it, Grace picked her daughter up and bowed her head apologetically. But Miles shook his head and placed a hand over his heart, a gesture of thanks he hadn't used in a long time. Grace's eyes softened with something like relief. She nodded and carried Maddie out. But Maddie kept pointing back at Miles, giggling and signing eat again just before the door closed. That night, as Miles lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he felt something he didn't quite recognize at first. The emptiness was still there, but it wasn't crushing him anymore. Maddie had filled the silence with something new connection. The change began slowly but deeply. The next evening, Miles asked Grace through written notes if she could encourage Maddie to join him for dinner. Grace hesitated because she didn't want to cross professional boundaries, but Miles insisted. Soon, the strange little dinners became a nightly pattern. Maddie would climb into the chair across from him, bang her little hands on the table, and sign clumsy shapes while Grace tried not to panic in the background. Miles would eat everything she pointed to. He even began learning to read her childish expressions as if they were sounds he could feel. Maddie became the first person to pull him back into life. Miles found himself smiling more, gesturing more, even communicating more with Grace through notes and shared looks. In time, he noticed something else: Grace's exhaustion, her worry, the shadows beneath her eyes. She was a single mother working 2 jobs to survive. One evening, she finally confessed, through a carefully written note, that she had been struggling to afford Maddie's daycare and might have to quit working for him. Miles' chest tightened as he read her words. Losing Maddie would feel like losing the one spark that had rekindled the fire in his silent world. Without hesitation, he scribbled a reply telling her he would double her salary and cover daycare entirely. Grace stared at the paper with wide, trembling eyes. She refused at first, shaking her head adamantly, but Miles placed a gentle hand on her arm and made the sign for family. Grace burst into tears. As weeks turned into months, something unexplainable unfolded. Grace wasn't just Maddie's mother anymore. She became the warmth in the corners of Miles' life, the one who left fresh flowers in the hallway, the one who learned more ASL just to communicate with him better, the one who sat with him even after Maddie fell asleep. And Miles? He became someone he hadn't recognized in years, softer, kinder, hopeful. But the true turning point came one spring evening. Miles sat at the table waiting, but Grace didn't appear. Instead, Maddie toddled in alone, her steps steady but determined. She pulled herself into her chair, looked at Miles with serious eyes, and made another sign, one Miles hadn't seen from her before. She pressed her hand to her heart, then extended it outward, the sign for love. Miles' eyes burned instantly. Grace rushed in seconds later, breathless, apologizing for being late, but she stopped when she saw his trembling hands. She realized what Maddie had done, and for the first time, Grace walked around the table, knelt beside Miles, and signed the word herself: love. Tears slipped down Miles' cheeks silently. Maddie clapped, delighted, unaware she had just changed 2 lives forever. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in the power of unexpected connections. Before the ending, comment below: love can be learned in silence. From that day forward, Miles never dined alone again. The mansion that once echoed with quiet emptiness became a home filled with light, laughter he could feel, and love he didn't need ears to understand. Grace and Maddie didn't just restore sound to his world, they gave him something much greater. They gave him life again.